setup.
6 or 7.
Okay. Good morning.
Morning.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I've been talking so much the past few days. I'm well set up to sing dwarf music at this point. Okay, so good morning. I guess we're talking about the Dresden Files today. Is that right? Okay, good. So we'll limit our questions to the Dresden Files. I'm pretty sure you've asked them all at this point, but.
Oh, I thought it was a lecture.
Oh, am I lecturing? Good
It
God.
said you were talking about books from the evolution of the Dresden Files all the way through Steam.
Oh, okay. The evolution of the Dresden Files. Go. Yeah. Well, I started writing down little wizard books, and then people liked them, and I'm still doing it. The end. Yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know how much evolution there's been, considering I'm still following an outline that I wrote when I was 25. Because I'm of the opinion that if it isn't broke, don't go fixing it, and it seems to be working out. So 25-year-old me was, well, he was a flippin' moron, but apparently he did a couple of things right, and I don't want to mess with his vision at this point. So let me think. I did not ever really think that people would be LARPing to my books. At the time when I got started, I held up my measure of when I knew I was super fantastic and successful would be when somebody had a mush of my books. Because I was way too into mushing. Yeah, I know. Mushing? Mushing is multi-user shared hallucination is what it stands for. Essentially, it's a virtual reality that's all text-based instead of graphic-based. So you line on, you get online and you're doing interactive storytelling with the other players. And there's definitely a process to being able to do that and learn how to do it well, and writing a lot of dialogue for your players. But it was in writing mushing that I learned to lip off to people effectively, and well, at least effectively enough to have them beat up my characters all the time. So I was very, very good at playing villains on mushes because everybody wanted to be a hero, and they didn't seem to understand that what people really need in order to be a hero is an awesome villain. So I had tons of villainous characters, and people were like, well, why do you only play psychotics? It's like, why do I play psychotics? I play villains because that's so everybody else can have fun. And all the girls think they're sexy. That's just a villain, that's a go-to villain thing, you know, so. Anyway. God, 2 hours of talking. Man.
You mean they didn't tell you this before?
They probably told me, I probably didn't listen. I mean, I knew the title of the thing. I hadn't actually read the description, it's in the pamphlet. Is it?
Yeah, really is.
All right, well, for those who don't know, the Dresden Files started as my project to prove to my writing teacher how wrong she was about all the highly useful things she was trying to teach me about writing. I knew far better than she did, being that I was a 25-year-old with a bachelor's degree in English literature with an emphasis on creative writing. And she'd only published 40 novels, so what did she know? And so one semester I decided, okay, I'm gonna fill out all her little worksheets, I'm gonna do all her little forms, and do all her outlines, and do these ridiculous character profiles, and then she's going to see what awful cookie-cutter paddle crap results of such a process. And so I did everything she told me to. I was a good little writing monkey, and I wrote Stormfront as a result. I think I wrote about 200 pages of Stormfront, and then finished the rest of it that summer. But after I wrote it, and she said, this is going to sell, and I was like, that blew my mind. I went out and started trying to sell it, and she gave me a letter of introduction to her editor, Betsy Mitchell, and at ACE, and I was thrilled because I thought it's going to happen. It's really going to happen. I have a letter of recommendation from an actual author to her editor, and I think Betsy still had that book holding up the corner of her desk when I eventually sold it elsewhere. The process of getting in, because apparently just being good enough to do it that's not all it takes to get into the industry. You've actually got to get somebody to pay attention to the fact that you're actually good enough to write stories that people are going to want to read. So it was at that point that I started learning about networking. I had some, entry-level skills, and now I needed to find somebody who was going to give me a chance to use them. So I started going around conventions and trying to introduce myself to editors, including, or no, it wasn't Betsy, it was Ginger Buchanan was who it went to, including trying to go and meet Ginger so that she would be able to attach a face to the manuscript that she had on her desk with a shiny letter of recommendation from a writing teacher. I mean, come on, if a writing teacher doesn't know what's good writing, who does? That went on for about 3 years, going to conventions and meeting people and trying to make a good impression on editors and agents. I don't know how much of an impression I made, but the breakthrough finally came when I went off to a writers' conference in Missouri, where Laurel Hamilton was going to be there. And I loved Laurel's books, and I was writing books that were somewhat like Laurel's, and I was on her reading list online. I think she was about 5 books into her series at this point. And her agent was going to be there as well. So I thought, well, this is perfect. I can go introduce myself to her agent, and everything will work out. And that's basically what happened. I went to the convention, and all the other fan writer, aspiring writers were there and were around Laurel, and they all wanted to talk to her about Richard, Anita, Jean-Claude, and I walked up to her and was like, well, I've got some questions from your list. I'm on one of your fan lists, and I've got some questions from your list, and maybe I could have a few minutes of your time later to ask them and take them back to the fans. And she's like, yeah, that'd be fine. I'm like, great, super. Do you like Buffy? And she's like, I love Buffy, and like latched onto me because there were all these people that were asking her writing questions, and she, I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So we started talking about Buffy. Do you like Babylon 5? I love Babylon 5, and so now we had 2 things to talk about, and then we went through the buffet line, and I was going through the line going good, evil, good, evil, and she's like, what are you doing? It was like, it's the only way I can sort out diet food is I have to break it down to a conflict of light and darkness, and she's like, you don't understand, all diets are creatures of darkness. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I better have some chocolate. Like that. But anyway, so the next day at the conference, I was wandering around bumping into walls, which is what I do when I don't have a keeper. I show up at places not knowing what I'm going to talk about. And Laurel basically saw me bumping into walls and said, hey Jim, do you want to come have lunch with us? And I said, I eat lunch. That's about how capable I was at the time. And so I found myself at lunch with Laurel Hamilton and 3 other professional writers and 2 editors and 3 agents. And they liked Buffy and Babylon 5 because everybody in this business is a nerd to one degree or another. I mean, if the only people I worked with who were not nerds were like PR people. And we go through those pretty quick. I don't know if that's a function of the fact that they're not nerdy enough or what, but or maybe it's just their business. It was actually pretty hilarious. One of the PR people I worked with at one point was just one of the most unpleasant people I've ever met. It's like, why are you in public relations? I mean, of all things you could be doing, public relations. But anyway, so there I was at the table, and I went up to Risha Mainhart, who was Laurel's agent at that time, and said, I'm writing something that's sort of like what Laurel writes, and maybe you'd like it too. And she's like, well, maybe I would. I said, she asked me what I was writing, and I said, well, it's something that's like Laurel's, and I thought maybe you would like it too. And she says, well, maybe I would. And I'm like, no, you rejected me about 2 weeks ago. And she's like, oh, well, you know what, let me take a look at it. And I said, all right, and I had a couple of chapters for her to look at. And I guess the chapters kind of went around between the agents who were there, and because the next day, Risha said, hey, I want to represent you. And I said, really? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, that will be fine. And I flipped out, and, because I had an actual agent. And before the conference was over, the other two agents who were there had also offered up to represent me. One of whom is Jennifer Jackson, the agent I'm working with now. And I remember telling Jennifer I already agreed to go with Rich, and Jennifer was like, wow, she moves fast. Okay, well, good for you. And I'm like, can I ask you something? She's like, yeah. I said, you rejected me 2 weeks ago. She says, I know. And I said, you rejected me 2 weeks ago with a form rejection letter. And she says, uh-huh. I said, and it was a copy of a form rejection letter. And she says, yeah. And I said, and it was a crooked copy. And she says, I know. And I said, so why are you offering this now? Because it's the same writing that you just rejected. And she says, because now I know that you've played the Amber Diceless role-playing game. And that makes a difference. There are so few other people who've actually played that game, and I'm like, and that blew my mind, and how important it was to actually make those contacts on a personal level for people to get to know your face.
What decision did you make to Stormfront once you had an agent? Like I've seen I'm a beta for a different writer, and when her first book went to the agent suggested a couple of changes, and it completely changed the book, but also made it a whole lot better. How much did you have to change Stormfront before it actually hit publication?
Not much. That was why it sold. Honestly, I think that the agent, Risha sent it around to agents, and Rock said, let's do it. And that was Jennifer Heddle at Rock. And really, I think Jennifer Heddle made that choice based on the fact that, one, she wasn't going to have to do much work on my manuscript, and that's really what you want in a newbie, is somebody who's just not going to eat up too much of your time. And then two, I already had the next 2 books in the series written. So, you know, Risha never really offered in terms of rewriting the book. She never really did too much for that. Her business was trying to sell it, and if she had read it and thought it would fly, then she went out and tried to sell it. When I changed agents and I started working with Jennifer Jackson, I'd actually written. She was trying to sell the Alara books. Is what she had to work with at first. And the Alara books, Risha had sent them around to everybody, and they hadn't flown. I'd gotten rejections from I think there were about 14 fantasy publishers at that point, and they'd blown them all. They'd all said no, thank you. Jennifer got hold of it and said, you know, what you really need to do is you need to take these 2 chapters and put them first. And then you need to take this, in these 4 chapters, you've got about 100 pages, and you need to chop that down to about 50 pages. And then they'll love it. And so I said, really? You think that's all that needs to happen to this? Because I thought I was going to have to go with a whole new project. And she says, no, if you just do that, we'll sell it. And she was right. So I changed the order of the opening chapters, and I cut down the first 100 pages of Tavi's storyline to 50 pages of Tavi's storyline, and boom. She got it put up to auction and got it sold into hardback. Wow. So I mean, yeah, she knew what she was talking about. So that was that's handy if you have somebody you can work with like that. At this point, when I get a book written, there's usually not a whole lot of necessary revising that gets done. And Gloria and Priscilla can tell you that, because they read the first draft and they read the final draft, and they're usually pretty close to the same thing. But that's also a function of I've been doing this for 15 years and 25 years if you count the 10 years before, where I didn't sell anything or get paid or really entertain anybody except maybe myself.
Yeah, one of the things I find entertaining about the series is that you don't choose one kind of werewolf or one kind of vampire. You just kind of like throw them all in. Okay. What all have you gone through for source material on the sheet?
On the sheet?
Yeah.
Mostly fairy tales and extrapolating their nature from fairy tales. Let's see, Mad Queen of Air and Darkness I originally met on Mush. So there's that. I think there was probably a White Wolf source book somewhere in the past, and let's see, the Book of Fairy Wicca, where I did some research on fairies, and then just lots and lots of books where I would just go and read old stories and old fairy tales, and especially if you go read like French fairy tales, they are outrageous, and there's lots of beautiful maidens who turn out to be ogresses who eat you alive and that sort of thing. That's, you know, bless the French. They had some really good medieval stories. But yeah, I mean, that's mostly where I go. If you do go looking for fairy tales and myth and folklore books, don't go to the grown-up section, because if you go to the grown-up section and start reading those stuff, you're not going to be able to go 3 or 4 paragraphs until you start tripping over Freud and Jung, because they've all got to write serious stuff because they're writing for adults. Go to the children's section where they just write the stories, because that's when you get the good stuff. Now you might have to do some reading into the lines, because a lot of these, especially if you look at Norse tales, they were originally translated in Victorian England for English consumption. And so basically my rule of thumb for reading those stories is to replace the word wedded with embedded, and suddenly the Norse fairy tales make a lot more sense. You know, so Odin wedding the 9 daughters of some kind of sea god in order to give birth to Heimdall. He married all 9 of them. That must have been a ceremony. But you know, once you replace wedded with bedded, it makes much more sense. Like, oh, now I get it. Plus, you know, you really get such a different picture of Loki if you go straight to the Norse tales, because wow, what a psychotic. And yet at the same time, I think Loki was really more like Odin than anybody else in the Norse pantheon, which is probably why he was still around. But anyway, so from there, I just started writing books, and I wrote the first 3 books, and the most editing I ever had on Dresden Files book was on Grave Peril, where I had to expand 4 separate subplots and cut the total length of the book by 50 pages. So there are lots of scenes that just got chopped out of Grave Peril. There was Harry and the ghoul had this subplot, and the ghoul tried to rip the engine out of Harry's car and didn't realize it was in the back instead of the front, and stuff like that. You know, so but that was all stuff that had to get chopped out because it wasn't necessary. But then after that, I started going to conventions and being on panels. I was on my first panel with Patrick Nielsen Hayden, Glenn Cook, and Terry Goodkind, maybe? No, Neil Gaiman. That was my first panel. I didn't actually have a book out yet. I had a book sold, but it wasn't going to be published for like another 3 months. And but here I'm on a panel with one of the most awarded editors in fantasy, Glenn Cook, who's a veteran of the genre, and Neil, who I didn't know who he was, but he seemed like a nice guy when I met him in the elevator. I didn't actually read Sandman until a couple of years ago, so I had no idea who the guy was. Anyway, the title of the panel was Books That Could Have Used a Better Editor. And so here I am, and they're all talking about all these various books, and I'm feeling like an idiot because they're all referring to books I've never heard of or looked at or read. And so I'm mostly just being quiet. And we get towards the end of the panel, and Neil looks at me and it's like, Jim, you've been entirely quiet this entire time, and I feel that we've not gotten any opinion from you. And I really think I'd like to hear what you have to say. And I'm like, well, no, I'm new at this, and you guys know the business, and I'm not. I'm the new guy. I don't even have a book out yet. And Glenn's like, no. If you got something to say, you should say it. And Patrick Nielsen Hayden is all, yeah, exactly. We should get your opinion. And come on, you must have a book that you think could have used a better editor. And I'm like, okay. The Lord of the Rings really needed to lose the first 200 pages. And here's why. And so I delivered my rant on the Lord of the Rings. And about how it doesn't really get interesting until you meet Aragorn, because he's the first character who actually seems to be capable of influencing the story in a way beyond something that is beyond being rescued from danger. And so that was my, and I kind of went through this whole thing, and Glenn Cook is sitting next to me just going like this the entire time, and Neil is just sitting back like this, and Patrick Nielsen Hayden is just getting redder and redder. And so finally, they get to respond, and the last 5 minutes of the panel is fairly furious. And Patrick Nielsen Hayden tore me to shreds because he's much better at arguing at a panel than I was at that point. But Neil was the one who sort of brought peace to the panel. You know, he was the one sort of like, well, I do think we can all agree that the Lord of the Rings will probably not be sold today. You know, and he does have a point. The first 200 pages or so of the story are quite precious. You know, it's like, oh, yeah, precious, nice. But anyway, and from there, after that, my book was published, and I was going to be famous and wealthy. Convention after the book was published and going to my first reading, Jim Butcher will be reading from storefront of the Dresden Files, and I went to the reading and nobody came. I went to the room and I just sat there and nobody came to the room. And so I picked up and walked back to my hotel room and sat there and felt bad. You know, and it was like that. It was my first signing and nobody came. You know, a friend showed up and bought one of my books to make me feel better. My first signing was at a bookstore at the mall. And you know, my next signing was like that, and you know, the one that I had back in Independence, my hometown, went a little bit better because several of my teachers showed up. But anyway, book 2 came out, and book 3 came out, and it was all pretty much the same thing. And I think I made, on those first 3 books in those first 3 years, I think I made maybe $20,000 total. Yeah, that's not really, for a 3-year income, that's not really a whole lot. That's not really much of a part-time job. But at the same time, you know, I was also working nearly full-time. I think I was doing 38 hours a week at a local internet provider, and a lot of that time was free time, so I was continuing to write. Most of Summer Night was written at that job. I wrote really the second 2 books and the first Alera book at that job, and started up the second Alera book there. And I was still working, and Summer Night came, and I managed to meet with my editor and convince her to buy the next 3 books in the series, because the first 3 books had gone into the black, and they liked that. They're like, yeah, we haven't done anything to advertise the series, and yet it's still clearing its you know, it's still clearing its advances and making money, and we're not sure why, but it is. And I'm like, okay, great. Would you like more? And they say, yes, we would like a deal for 2 more books. And I'm like, excellent. And so I had 2 more books to try and get the series to take off, and so I wrote Summer Night, and then after that came, you know, I wrote Death Masks. And they're like, we would like to do 2 more. And I'm like, oh, fantastic, 2 more books, yes, here you go. And I wrote the Blood Rights, and it was at that point, because now I was making, you know, in the next 3 years, you know, I made more like $40,000 over that 3 years, because I had twice as many books out, and they were still just kind of plugging along and quietly making a little bit of money. And you know, I went to panels and people had actually read one of my, oh, I read one of your books once, I think. I don't think I finished it. You know, was sort of kind of the responses I was getting. And yeah, I kept meaning to finish it though. And so, thank you. Your intentions are very flattering. And but I finally, where it all changed was I went to Dragon Con one year, and I was late for panels right after Blood Rights had come out, and I was late for a panel, and the panel I was supposed to be at, because it was very exciting because I'd been given a panel to myself. You know, Jim Butcher talks about the Dresden Files, and I was late because it's me, and yeah, I was late because reasons. And I remember coming down the escalator to go down to this underground room in one of the hotels where the panel was supposed to be, and I figured, I really was sort of dreading it because I thought I might show up and have like 1 or 2 people there, you know, maybe. And I got there, and the hallway was just, DragonCon's crazy, and the hallway was just completely crowded. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be late. I mean, I know there's gonna be like 2 people there, but I at least should be professional enough to be on time. And so I'm sort of standing there in the hall, just sort of waiting and waiting and waiting, and after a minute I noticed that the hall's gotten really quiet and that everybody's staring at me. And I'm kind of looking back at him and like, what, is there something on my face? And one of them says, are you Jim Butcher? And I'm like, do I owe you money? Because that's not the sort of question I'd ever gotten before. And he turns to his friends and says, "That's Jim Butcher." And then the hall's like, like that. And I don't understand what's going on. And I'm like, wait a minute, and they're like, "Why are you waiting in line?" And I'm like, "Well, line? Wait, are you guys here for my panel?" And the entire hallway, it's like 200 people, it's like, "Yes!" And I'm like, "You didn't have anything better to do?" You know, was sort of my mystified response. And they're like, "No, we love your books, man." And so after that, you know, the room let out with the room in front of me, and they'd actually gotten me a very large room. And by the time everybody got there, it was, you know, all the seats were filled, and it was standing room only, and people were sitting on the floor up around the podium where I was, and standing along the walls. And it was the first time I'd ever been in a room full of people who liked me. And that was damned odd. Nice, but really, really weird. Not a problem I'd ever considered what I might have to do with. You know, I'm going to trip over a fan. You know, that had never been something that had occurred to me. Might eventually be an issue. Mostly I just wanted to make enough money that I wouldn't have to wear a tie anywhere. Which I consider the primary reason to be an author, is you never ever have to wear a tie. But anyway, after that, I realized that the books were selling more, and I had switched agents at that point, and Jennifer had sold the Alera books, and suddenly I was making, you know, I was making enough money that I could, you know, turn to Shannon at that point and say, you don't have to be an engineer anymore if you don't want to, as long as you don't want to eat too well. And suddenly I had 2 series out. I was writing 2 books a year. I was making enough money to support my family, which after 10 years of trying to break in and doing nothing, and then about 5 years of just sort of plugging away at this little part-time job that barely paid anything, was really shocking to realize, wait a minute, I can support myself with what I do? That's kind of neat. I've never really been able to do that before, except by fixing people's ability to connect to the internet and play video games, because, and I really always felt that was sort of a vested self-interest, that just, I happen to be able to market out to other people as well. But anyway, so after that, you know, off to the races. The books continued, kept gaining popularity. I don't really think my process of writing the books had changed at all. I had my outline and I was sticking to it because I was terrified that I would mess it up if I changed anything. And I think that accurately describes me today as well. So after that, there we go. And I got to write a Spider-Man book for Marvel, which was horrible for my sanity and my work schedule, but which was still an enormous amount of fun. And then they started doing audiobooks, and you know, I remember getting a call about audiobooks and saying, you know, would you like us to do an audiobook of your novels, Storefront? And what I heard was, would you like us to pay for your family's health insurance? I said, yes, I would like that to happen. And so that would be great, yay. And then they called back later and said, would you like us to have Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer read the books? And I said, that would be great, yay. So that's how that happened. That was all me, you know, just being on the other end of the phone going, yay. That's really how you get a lot done, apparently. But anyway, and now, you know, there's another deal in the works that looks like it might turn out into something. We'll see. And you know, we've got the audiobooks and books translated into, I think the Dresden Files have gone into 15 or 16 different languages now. And you know, and the Alera books are almost that many. I've got all these, occasionally I'll get a book in the mail that is in a language I can't read and a print I don't understand, and the letters go up and down or diagonally across the page or something, and I don't get it at all, and I can't recognize anything from the title, but apparently the book is mine. You know, because it'll be like, you know, Chinese characters, Jim Butcher. Huh. All right. this point, it took 10 years of just grinding with no one saying I could do it, and going home to Christmas parties, and I had one cousin who was always, so have you gotten a real job yet? And I got to hear that for 10 years. And then 5 years of barely making anything, and which could have been a lot longer. A lot of writers don't do as well as I did out the gate, and that my success was a factor of some fortunate things and a lot of hard work. That said, if it took twice as long to get where I am now, I think it still would have been worth it. Because I'm in a great place now. I have a world of fantastic problems to deal with. People keep asking me when the next book is going to come out, and I had to go to physical therapy for 3 months because I hurt my arm signing too many signatures, which that's a fucking awesome problem. It makes it no less painful, but I can't really see myself whining. Oh God, my arm hurts. Signed too many books. Oh.
That's what she said when you went to physical therapy.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's like, what happened? Signed too many books. Signed too many books and then went weightlifting on the same day is what it was. I did 2,000 signatures and then tried to do forearm curls and reverse forearm curls, and that is not something you should do. Bad things happen to your arm when you do that. But anyway, so that's been the evolution of the Dresden Files so far, and we're still going, and I think the next stage is going to be, the books get to be bigger and bigger now, because, once I finally killed Harry, it was time for the fun stuff. And that was what, oh my God, I can't believe you killed, my editor was like, I can't believe you killed Harry, and I'm like, yeah, I know, now we get to do the fun stuff. and she's like, wait, what? Because that was like the end of the contract, and changes was the end of the contract with them. And they're like, wait, what? Now we get to do the fun stuff? I'm like, yeah, oh come on, he's a wizard, give him a break. He's a bit dead, he's mostly dead. Yes.
Why does the cover illustrator keep putting a hat on it?
The art department told him to. When they had him start working, the art department thought that the perfect way to convey Wizard Private Eye was to have the quarterstaff and the fedora. And that was the perfect visual way to confer Wizard Private Eye to the reader. And so he has a hat. And at this point, I'm like, oh, by the end of the series, you know what, maybe I'll just get him a fedora. There's a really significant one at the Smithsonian. But yeah, that's why. So people are always like, but I make jokes about the hat all the time, and people are always like expecting some kind of rivalry or some kind of friction between me and the artist, Chris McGrath. And it's like, no, it's not that at all. Chris is doing what he's getting paid to do. He's producing art according to the guidelines of the art department, who's paid.
Well, you put it in the text that he doesn't wear a hat a couple of times.
Yeah, I have.
The only person who's been fooled so far has been Nicolas Cage.
Oh, Nicolas Cage. Yeah, I saw that movie he did. But yeah, he also had the hat, so, I don't know, although, I don't know, maybe that was just his Witch Hunter hat from that Witch Hunter movie he did, which I still haven't seen. I need to, but I keep meaning to, but I haven't.
The first book I read of yours came out of the Science Fiction Book Club. There was no hat on the cover at all.
Yeah, the Science Fiction Book Club books, the one that Dan DeSantos did all those covers, and he does a great Dresden, he really does. The one of Harry on Sue is the best Dresden art ever.
Oh wait, that's marvelous.
Yeah.
But that's what introduced me. So having it in the Science Fiction Book Club actually expand your reader audience a lot.
I don't know, maybe I didn't even know it happened. Somebody showed up with one of those books and said, here, and I'm like, what is this? This book, this art, I've never seen this before or heard that it existed. What?
It had 3 copies of, 3 different...
Yeah, 3 different books in it, and how did this happen? And I remember turning to Jen, how did this happen? Oh, this was part of that deal you signed. I did? She was like, yeah. And she said something, and the English words were probably, we're doing a deal for the Science Fiction Book Club. And but the words I heard were, we want to replace your ancient Saturn. And oh, right. The CRV, okay, yeah. I remember the CRV deal.
If 7 and 8 had been in a different order, what role do you think Molly might have played in Deadbeat?
Well, she would have been Harry's lockdown apprentice at that point, and official apprentice, more or less. So she would have been standing. Well, she would have been inducted into the wardens as well at that point. You know, Harry would have demanded a cloak for her as well, so she would have had warden time under her belt. Probably Ramirez would not have gotten the role he'd gotten because Molly would have been filling it, at least to some degree. And she might have gotten horribly hurt along the way somewhere, you know, broken an arm or something like that. She probably would have gotten abused a bit because, you know, the closer you are to the center of the story, the more likely you are to attract my attention. But anyway, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the transition for not just novel writing, but also going into the Tabletop RPG, the base system game?
Oh yeah.
I was really interested when that came along, and I was caught off guard by it. So if you want, can you talk a little bit about that?
I can. When I was playing Ambermush, I got in a conflict with a guy who didn't like my character. I think because there was a girl who enjoyed role-playing with my character more than role-playing with his character. But he didn't like my character, and so we had a confrontation about it, and his friend showed up. And I tried to have the confrontation with the guy and be as reasonable as possible. And his friend was with him, and basically his friend was there and talking as well, and observing the conversation online. And basically every time the guy said something, his friend would go, yeah, like that. And then at the end of the conversation, the other guy stormed off in a huff, and his friend had said, listen, everything you said today was reasonable, and you seem like a decent guy. But this guy's been my friend for 7 years, and I still think you're a jerk because he's my friend. And I said, I can totally respect that, man. He's like, okay, fine. And off he went. And then over the next couple of years, I ran into this guy a few more times, and then finally at one point, he had moved into the same state. I was in Norman, Oklahoma, and he went to school in Tulsa or up near Stillwater, and we had you know less frictiony interaction in the time since then. And I played one of my villains and his characters, and my villains basically they had the ability to lose awesomely well at good times. And that's why people enjoyed playing with me, because I would cheerfully have my characters lose, and I didn't really have an ego about it. I mostly just wanted people to have fun. And so his character had gotten to look awesome at a very critical moment in the drama of what was going on in the Mush story, thanks to me. And I was like, hey man, we're playing D&D on Saturday. If you want to, come on down, and you know we'll play D and have some hamburgers, and you can crash at my place and go home in the morning. And he's like, yeah, okay. And so he came down, and that was when I met Fred Hicks. And Fred Hicks played D&D, and I tortured his character badly, and he had a great time doing it. We were playing Birthright D&D, which was the awesome D&D. It was what I like to call Highlander D&D, because that's really what it amounted to. The gods had a huge conflagration and their godly apocalypse and exploded. And then basically their followers, whoever was standing close enough to get splattered with their blood, inherited bits of their power based on how much they got splattered with. And so all the PCs, and that was why it was called Birthright, because it was all passed down through these bloodlines. And so you know the PCs were all of varying levels of power based on how close their ancestors had been standing to the gods. And you know, poor Fred's character just got abused left, right, and center. And he loved it, because every time he would come up with something, he had one particular villain he was faced up against, and every time he would come up with something, the villain would come up with something else, you know. So, you know, Fred managed to slip into the camp and assassinate, you know, the night before the battle, and assassinate the villain's 3 main lieutenants. And then when they went and checked out the camp the next day, the villain was a necromancer. He animated his lieutenants and had them digging latrines with signs around their neck that said, if I did this to them, what will I do to you? You know, like that. and it was all this stuff that went on like that, and Fred just ate it up. And so after the game that night, we stayed up. He'd never seen Big Trouble in Little China, so we stayed up late watching Big Trouble in Little China. And after that, Fred was down every weekend, and we would play D&D and stay up till all hours watching movies and swapping gaming stories and so on. And so that was basically how I sold the Dresden Files into a game. Because a few years later, I hadn't lived near Fred for many years, but a few years later, Fred called me and said, "Hey, I want to license your game for a role-playing game." And I thought, really, Fred, who I remember him from his college days in his junkie car, and him not really having much in the way of resources or anything, but being a really great guy and having all kinds of fun gaming with him. And I said to myself, I'm thinking to myself, do I need to do this? Should I wait for like a big company to come along and offer this? And at the same time, I'm going, well, what big company is going to come do that? And what big company are you going to enjoy working for more than you enjoy working with your friend? And I said, yeah, Fred, go for it. And we set up a deal, and I think the original deal was like for $500 for the rights or something like that, because he was just getting started. And so Fred went out and decided what he wanted to do, and then realized that he didn't have enough of a structure to build what he wanted to build. So he actually wound up producing 3 other games to build up his company to be big enough to produce the game he wanted to build on the Dresden Files. And so basically every once in a while I'd get a call from Fred, and then Fred started getting minions, and I'd get a call from Fred's people who were working on the game. And I'd trade emails with people, with folks who loved the books and who were so deeply researched into the books that they were guessing things that were going to happen 2 or 3 books ahead of time, and I'd have to tell them, no, you can't put that in there. But yeah, I mean, it was just amazing. And what I did for it was decide to work with my buddy instead of waiting to work with a big company. Fred was my friend, and Fred is the kind of guy who says, I don't care if you're completely reasonable, I'm sticking with my friend, like that. And I had to respect that. And Fred is he is one of the cooler guys I've ever known. We disagree on all kinds of things across the spectrum, but Fred is an upright, honorable man. And I'm thrilled that he produced that game and did it so well. And did it in these books that can freaking stop bullets. They're so thick. Oh my gosh.
How much did D&D or role-playing influence your writing?
It hasn't influenced my writing so much as my writing has influenced my gaming. Because once I started understanding the joy of torturing characters, I could give that directly to my players. and players, I mean, because really, I mean, people think, oh, well, aren't they going to get upset? No, players eat that stuff up, man. When somebody shows up specifically to torture them, that's not something that they say, that's mean. That's something that they go, that's awesome. Especially if it's a good villain that you've built up well. Yeah, the players that I play now, or that I play with now, at the moment are my son and my nephews, and a couple of his friends, and now it's turning into a couples game as they get older and start securing girlfriends and so on. So it's like, you think you're good enough to game? Do you think you're good enough for my son? Let's play some D&D. She was a novice; she'd never played any games before, but she was willing. So the family's been educating her as she's been dating JJ. So my sister's like, it's like, okay, here's a copy of Firefly and Serenity for Christmas. You need to watch this if you want to understand our people. And she's like, okay. But her name is Erin. She's kind of awesome. I like her. But it's very serious that they've got a dog. That's serious. So now I'm officially a grandfather. I've got a dog who weighed 30 pounds when he was 8 weeks old. Yeah, Jay shows up to him at Christmas, and he's already had the dog for 2 weeks, and he didn't tell me anything about it. And then he just sort of shows up at Christmas with this puppy. And I'm kind of like, are you kidding me, Jay? You've got a dog. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, wow. So what the dog is like, what, about 4 or 5 months old? No, 8 weeks. And I'm like, you've got an 8-week-old. Oh God, son, what have you done? Sort of my attitude. But I'm like, are you sure you want? And he's like, yeah, I thought about this, and this is my dog. And apparently, his friends had gotten a dog, and then had their landlord had found out, and they had rescued the dog from a shelter where he was going to be killed. And they said the only option was for him to go back to the shelter. And I said, I couldn't let that happen. Look at him. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. And so he had a puppy named Atlas. And Atlas is now almost 6 months old and looks like a frickin' dire wolf. I mean, he's this tall and is huge. And Atlas knows the greatest trick ever. He knows how to high five. So hook him up to you and sit down and just be looking at you with one ear sticking up and the other one flopping over like this, and with that dumb dog grin because he got the best dumb dog grin ever. But he's a really smart dog. He's a really great natured dog. A lot of the big dogs are like that. They're very gentle and very easygoing.
What breed?
He's half Great Pyrenees and half Husky. Which anytime you hear half Husky, you know the dog's going to be big. It seems like all the biggest ones have got some Husky mix in there somewhere. But at this point, he weighs 90 pounds and is still, he's got another 2 months of fast growth to do. And then apparently after that, it's slow growth until the universe collapses around him. Yeah, it's hilarious because he's still skinny enough to fit through the dog door that we installed for our Bichon. You know, so he's kind of wiggle, and I got through, I'm back inside. And I'm like, Jay, you know that one of these days we're gonna have to decide, pull him out or push him through. Jay's like, yeah, I know. But he'll sit down and he'll go, Atlas, high five, and he'll hop up on his hind paws and high five your head, sit back down again. Like, do you like me now? It's like, yes, I like you a little bit.
Kind of speaking of dogs, I remember you mentioned that one of your favorite books was Watchers by Dean Koontz.
Yes.
And did that inspire Mouse at all?
There was some inspiration for Mouse in that, and you know, I won't lie, there's some in there, because Einstein was just, you know, the most awesome fictional dog ever, except I wanted to do Einstein the wizard dog, you know. So, but mostly Mouse was inspired by Frostbite Doom Reaver McBain Butcher, the puppy we got for my kid when he was 9, and the kid named it that. The Bichon Frise named Frostbite Doom Reaver McBain Butcher. But I had forgotten how awesome it was to have a dog in the family, and I thought Harry Dresden needs a dog. And so Mouse is the dog that my Bichon thinks he is. When my Bichon looks in the mirror, he sees Mouse. You know, and I haven't had the heart to tell him he's a Bichon Frise. He's been convinced all along, you know, that he's a temple dog. So.
Their dog, how big is he?
He weighs about 20 pounds. He's about this big. He fits under my arm like this, and often does because we'll walk around that way occasionally. And but he's my buddy, and he has survived. He has defeated the bear and the coyote now, which is pretty good for a 20-pound Bichon. But yeah, I mean that's where Mouse came from. Was man, it's awesome having a dog. How can Harry not have a dog? I've completely forgotten this. And so I knew I wanted to start a book with him running through a burning building with a box full of puppies and demonic monkeys behind him. Yeah, throwing flaming poo because I thought that really is the emblematic way to introduce Harry Dresden. And so, you know, and to introduce tension in the scene, I had to have one of the puppies be a troublemaker. And my dog, my Bichon, oh God, that dog was the troublemaker dog of the litter. Which is awesome because if you're ever going to get a puppy, I highly recommend getting the troublemaker because the dogs that are always going off getting into trouble are doing it because they're smart and bored. And they want to go find things to do. Now, it is a huge challenge learning to work with dogs like that. But if you can get them on your side, they are the most awesome dogs to have on your side. And you know, me and Frost at this point, you know, we're tied. We're buddies. He does all the dog stuff perfect. He just handles it, and he's 13 now, so he's he's earned his retirement. He's my captain of the guard. Captain of the guard retired, and so he spends a lot of time hanging out with me, snoozing, and that's perfect. As a rider dog, that's the ideal kind of dog to have.
I want to know the bear story.
The bear story. When we had followed Max's job out to Pennsylvania, and so we're living in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. We're in a 26-mile-long valley in the mountains of central Pennsylvania, south of State College, and there's 3 houses there, and the rest of it is Amish farms, which is great because the Amish are fantastic neighbors as long as you don't have to borrow their Wi-Fi, you know, or ask for a jump start for your car or something like that. I mean, you know, they can't help you there, but they're awesome otherwise. One night, you know, when we moved out there, we told the boy, hey. Kid, we know we're going to move you away from the town you've lived in your whole life, and the friends you've known your whole life, and the only school you've ever known, but you get a dog. And he's like, I win! Because he's been wanting a dog for years, because you know, so many friends had dogs and so on. So we got it, and so we got it. Shannon had very specific limits on what kind of dog she wanted, and originally it was was going to be an outside dog, you know, that could survive outdoors and wouldn't have to be inside a lot, and that, you know, she wouldn't have to deal with a whole bunch, and that could, you know, protect and defend the property. And then one of her relatives their dog had come in, had brought a tick in that had bitten her and given her Lyme disease. So she's like, I want a dog that's going to be inside, will never be outside, that will be hypoallergenic and that doesn't shed, and that we can tell instantly if there's a tick crawling on. And I'm like, okay. And so I started looking for dogs, and it turned out that the dogs that matched all these criteria were Westies or Bichon Frises. And so I went looking, and there was a breeder with Bichon Frises that was a very responsible breeder who had like 7 generations of the same family, and was like, if you ever have a problem with a puppy, absolutely do not do anything bad with this puppy, send it back here and I will give it a home. And I'm like, okay, this is the kind of person I want to get a dog from. And so she had one Bichon left of the litter. She's like, I gotta warn you, this is a troublemaker, and he's always wandering off and getting into trouble. And I'm like, that's okay. You know, I've got a boy here who's exactly the same way. So she sent the dog to us, and it was a puppy, and he was adorable, and he would sleep downstairs with the boy. We would put him on the bed at the boy's feet, and then put up the baby gate in the boy's room, and then so the puppies were downstairs, and the puppies stayed together all the time. That was their job. And one night, in the middle of the night, I had gone to bed, and you know, I'd gone to bed like around 1 or 2, and around 3 or 4, here comes this puppy. And he had somehow gotten down from the bed, which he'd never done before, gotten over the baby gate, which he'd never done before, climbed the stairs, which he'd never done before. And he was like this little 7 or 8 pound dog. He was not very old at this point. And had somehow nudged open the door to my room, which had never happened before. And then now he was carrying on the floor, on the bed next to me, and on the floor, you know, next to the bed. And I looked at him like, oh, dog, what is it? What is wrong with you? Come on. You know, he was always running off and getting into trouble, and I would have to haul him back to where he was supposed to be. And I'm like, all right, come on. And I pick him up and took him under my arm, go back downstairs, put you back with the boy. And I get in, and the boy is on the bed, and he's all curled up in a ball. He's kicked all the covers off. It's the middle of winter. He's kicked all the covers off. He's all curled up in a ball, shuddering. And I go over and feel his head, and he's hot, and I take his temperature. He's got 101 fever. And I kind of look at the dog and sensed that something was wrong, and it come to get me. Like, the dog was like, that's not right, or maybe just, he won't hold still and let me sleep. But either way, the dog had come to get me, and had known that something was wrong. And I was like, okay, dog, this is kind of what I had in mind when I thought, let's get a dog. And for having a dog assigned to the boy, this is the kind of tiny guardian angel stuff I was expecting, and thought I was not going to get. But you've done well. If you keep it up like this, there may be a place for you here. And so I got the boy taken care of and got him covered up again. He went back to sleep, and I put the dog back on the bed. And the dog curled up and went back to sleep with the boy, and all was well. I went back to bed and was very pleased with my wise investment of a dog. So about 3 weeks later, the same thing happens. And I'm like, what is it, Lassie? Did Timmy fall down the well again? And so I picked the dog and went downstairs with the dog, and the boy's fine. And I look at the dog like, what is wrong with you? And the dog's carrying on my hand, which he does not do when I'm holding him. He's normally very calm. So I kind of put him down, and the house that we were in was kind of this long, skinny house like this with a second story here, and the master bedroom was up here on the second story, and then down here right below it was the kitchen. The start of the kitchen was the back door to the house was the door we used to come in, and then the boys' bedroom was right here across from the door. And then the rest of the house kind of stretched down like this. It was all the way down to the kitchen and the dining room and the big break room at the end. And the dog runs about 10 feet down the kitchen and then stops and turns around and looks at me like that. And he won't shut up until I walk over to him. And then all of a sudden he's completely quiet. And then a minute later he runs another 10 feet and then I don't walk. And he looks back at me until I walk over to him. He's quiet again. And then another 10 feet, carry it on again until I walk to him. And we go all the way up and down the first floor of the house like this twice. And then he curls up in a ball on the floor between the door and the boys' room and goes to sleep. And I'm like, all right, dog, you did all right a couple of weeks ago, but tonight you're just flipping insane. And I don't know what's going on with you, but I'm putting you back in bed and I'm going back to sleep. And, you know, I have to get up in a few hours, get the boy up and go off to work. I'm doing kind of my writing stuff during late at night. And then I do the Mr. Mom thing during the day, get the boy off to school. And so the next morning I'm up, and And Shannon's already gone to work, and I'm shambling through the house zombie-like, getting the boy ready, getting him going, and getting him breakfast, and getting him, getting his coat on, and turn off that TV, and get your boots on, because there's a fresh snow last night. I'm going to have to break trail out to the bus stop with you, and so I'm getting my boots and my coat on, and I open the back door to go outside, and in the snow at the top of the steps to that back door right across from the boys' room are bear tracks the size of my fist, like this, on the stairs. There's smears on the door, on the glass door, where the bear had his nose pressed against it. A glass door, a glass pane that wide between an apex predator of the local ecosystem and my 75-pound, 9-year-old monkey who's 10 pounds. This is the end of February. This is a bear that has woken up early from hibernation because he didn't eat enough food to last the whole winter, and he's starving. And that dog had sensed that the bear was out there. And I went outside to look, and there were tracks that went all the way around the house twice, and I realized that the dog had made me walk up and down the house, keeping pace with the bear outside the house, so that the bear would know that I knew he was out there. And at that point, I looked at the dog and I said, "Dog, you have made your bones. You are part of the familia. From this point on, I have your back, and I will back you up no matter what happens." And so that's how my Bichon Frise saved my kid from a bear. So yeah, there was that happened. But he's been a great dog. His whole life he's been an awesome dog. And occasionally he still makes trouble. He does not like the new dog at all. He's just like, "That sucks. He's such a noob." But he's figured out how to deal with Atlas now. If he can jump up on the couch, then that puts him on eye level with Atlas and makes Atlas know that he's his equal. Because otherwise, Atlas is a very friendly dog. He loves Frost and wants to be friends with him, but he keeps walking on him by mistake. "Oh, I'm sorry, Frost. I didn't know you were down there." "Do you want to wrestle? Let's play tug of war with this toy. I know the toy's almost as big as you. Come on, you can do it." And Frost just kind of looks at me, I'll put him up on the couch, and so when Atlas comes over to sniff, Frost will go, "Grrr!" And Atlas has been taught when he gets in trouble, he's supposed to sit down when he's in trouble. It's his way of saying, "I'm sorry." So he'll come up and sniff Frost will be, "Grrr!" And Atlas will be like, "I'm sorry." So it's really interesting watching their dynamic, but...
Tell the coyote story.
It was this year, and I had some friends that were in town visiting, and Frost likes visitors, and once he gets used to them, there's some people that he loves and some people he doesn't love, and some people he just adores. And we had friends that were in town, and at one point during the evening, I remember it had been a busy day. We'd been going back and forth to Kansas City Comic-Con, and at one point in the evening, I remember that there were sirens going off, and I heard coyotes. I live on about 15 acres of land, most of which is just undeveloped, or it was a farm about a century ago. And now it's had about a century of time for trees to grow up around it. And mostly it's just forest. There's like a driveway that goes down through it, and then there's my house, and then 50 feet around it, and then the rest is just woods. So I live in a house in the woods in the middle of the town. So we get deer to go through every day, possums, I've seen foxes, rabbits and raccoons, and basically all your local flora would get it. And one of my area is actually one of the kind of an island of green between several places where deer and other animals migrate through. So it actually, my little 15-acre wood is actually quite busy with life. And last winter, we actually had coyotes. I mean, in the middle of the night, I start hearing this noise outside. It's a pack of coyotes, and I'm used to hearing them because we move out in LARP, out in the country. And we actually had a pack of 30 or 40 that would follow us around, especially when we'd build campfires, start to put over fires. They'd be loitering around all the time. And I just remember, and they're right in the woods, like not 20 or 30 feet from my house. And I went out on the back porch and was like, hey, they weren't paying any attention to me. So I did a Sasquatch yell like they do on Finding Bigfoot, and all of a sudden the coyotes went dead quiet. It's like, ah, yeah, you recognize Sasquatch. That's how I know Squatches are real, the coyotes know. But anyway, and they would occasionally come back, and I'd hear them in the woods immediately behind the house, and I would come out and do the Sasquatch yell, and they'd go away. And you know, one night we had a really, really heavy snow, with, you know, about 2 feet of snow, and well, it wasn't 2 feet, it was about a foot of snow, and 2 feet was for Pennsylvania. Oh my God. But we had about a foot of snow, and it was one of those all is quiet nights, you know, when you had a heavy snowfall. And they were just right out in the open, just brazen as anything. And I did a Sasquatch yell and went running after them and vaulted my fence and to send them running away. Because I want them to know there's a crazy Sasquatch that lives in that house. But anyway, so that night, it was early spring, I think, and I'd heard coyotes in the distance when there was a sirens going off earlier in the evening. And normally I let Frost out by himself at night, and he'll ramble around the yard a bit and come back inside, and that's how it works. And that night, for some reason, I decided I was going to go outside. I mean, I don't know why I decided to do that, but it was to the point where I had gone outside without shoes and wearing my bathrobe when normally I would put on shoes and a leather jacket. But he had gone out, and I felt a need to go with him. And I went and sat down on a rock outside the door, and well, Frost was just doing his normal thing, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, Jim, you've just been paranoid and done this for no reason. And right about the same time I'm thinking that, I see a very low, very smooth black shadow moving towards me out of the corner of my eye. And it's just a shape. It's not even really, it's just a different color of darkness. And I'm thinking to myself, you are paranoid, because now you're seeing things. But it kept moving out of the corner of my eye, and then I realized, you know what, that kind of reminds me of a shark, when I went and saw these sharks at the aquarium in Chicago. And then I thought to myself, and then I had time to think, that's a predator, and got it up and started running towards the dog, who I could see as a blob of white out there in the middle of the night. And right then the dog screamed. And there was snarling, and I did my Bigfoot scream and started running towards him. And the dog, I couldn't see whatever it was that had attacked the dog. Because I mean, it was just complete darkness, and there was a moon out. I was only about 40 feet away, but I still never saw the thing. And I just saw Frost was a blob of white. And when you're running and screaming at the top of your lungs, it's really shaky cam for your eyes. But he broke loose, and back to the house, and I scooped him up and ran him inside, and came back out, and I never even saw the thing leave. I mean, that was how smooth it was. So I knew I was dealing with a professional predator, and he had puncture wounds on either side of his neck, but because he's a Bichon, he's got really, really fine hair, and the hair had stopped all the wounds up like cotton balls. But we took him to the vet the next day, and it turns out he'd broken off a tooth on the thing. The vet says this was probably a coyote from your description. It only could have been a coyote or a wildcat, and wildcats go for the back of the neck. And this one had come up right under him like that before my dog didn't even realize they was there. You know, he's 13, doesn't see or hear as well as he used to. And but yeah, it nearly killed him, and it would have killed him if I hadn't been there and running and screaming. And one of its fangs had gotten caught. He had 2 deep puncture wounds on this side of his neck, but one of the coyote's fangs had gotten caught on the collar on this side and kept him from getting a good hold of it. So he just had one tooth on this side that had slipped and kind of gashed him a little bit. And then the other one got caught in his collar, and Frost had bit the coyote hard enough to break a tooth on it and left. So somewhere out there, there's a coyote thinking, God, that was not worth, that bunny was so much more fierce than I had anticipated. Yeah, I didn't realize what had happened, but now I go out with him with a flashlight so the coyotes will know I'm there. Because the coyote probably didn't know I was there because I was just sitting quietly on a rock next to the house. And I realized that same area that Frost was in, bunnies come out there every night. I never noticed it before until I started taking a flashlight and spotlighting them. And so the coyote had probably been closing in on a bunny while Frost had wandered out there doing his usual patrol around the yard, and Frost had scared off the bunnies and ruined the coyote's dinner. And I imagine that is what happened. But yeah, but you know, I take good care of the dog because he saved my kid from a bear, and so I've got his back, and he always gets all his shots and everything else he needs to be safe. And so he was fine. He had some battle damage, and he wore his scars proudly. I got some pictures of battle damage Frost, you know. And then then he healed up, and now he's fine, and now he's defeated a coyote too. You know, so that's the bear versus coyote story. But the coyote was personal, you know, it came on him when he was a lot older, you know, so. Anything else?
Why a wizard? What?
Why not a wizard?
There has to be an origin here, something, how did he come about?
My teacher, I've been trying to write Swords and Horses epic fantasy, because that's the kind of writer I was going to be. You know, I was going to write Tolkien stuff, and because that's what I was going to do. And my teacher had been saying, you know, maybe you should try some other things. And at one point I tried kind of an X-Files-y sort of book, and at another point, and that hadn't really worked out all that well. And I've been talking a lot about the Anita Blake books, and she's like, why don't you try writing, maybe just for fun, try writing something that's sort of in that same kind of genre. Because I was at the point where we were only like 3 or 4 books in the Anita books, and I was like, what Anita really needs to be is a necromancer. You know, was sort of the way I was thinking. Because she was just busy doing animator stuff at that point still. So I decided that I wanted to do something similar, except I was going to have a wizard, and that's what I was going to work with. So I built Harry from basically from Gandalf and Sherlock. Gandalf and Sherlock had a love child, and it was Harry Dresden. But that was why, basically that was why I was going to start a similar situation, and I wanted to have a wizard, and I thought if he's a full-on wizard, he can get into all kinds of trouble, not just necromancer style trouble. I can make him get in trouble everywhere. And so that was what, you know, that was what prompted that. Even though it was just an exercise at that point, it wasn't something I really believed in. It was just something I was doing to prove my writing teacher how long she was. But
Why Chicago?
Chicago was because my writing teacher wouldn't let me set it in Kansas City. Originally the books were set in Kansas City. My writing teacher, because it was the town I knew, it was where I grew up. And my writing teacher said, you were already walking close enough to Laurel Hamilton's toes that you don't need to set your story in Missouri. And because Laurel's stuff was set in St. Louis. And I was like, well, where else do I set it? She says, it doesn't matter, I don't care anywhere. And so there were 4 cities on the map, or on the globe, that was on her desk. She had a globe on her desk. I think she was still trying to figure out how to be a professor. But she had a globe on her desk. And the four U.S. cities that were represented on the globe, I didn't want to use New York because the superheroes had that all sewn up. I didn't want to use D.C. because if you write something in D.C., you've got to write politics, and that seemed like that would be certain to lose me at least half an audience. I didn't want to use L.A. because I didn't want to write things about L.A. If you guys got Hollywood and stuff, you're busy, okay? I just didn't want to deal with L.A. And so the other city that was on the globe was Chicago. I said, how about Chicago? She says, fine, Chicago, whatever, just not Missouri. And so Harry Dresden became Wizard of Chicago.
One of my favorite things that I've read that isn't fiction that you've written was the piece about how to write a really good villain. The 3 admirable qualities. It was an LJ post you wrote years ago.
Okay.
I looked, you know, they're very visible in like Nicodemus and Lara and Marcone. Not so much in like Tessa and Rosanna. Is that just because they haven't had much screen time?
It's because they aren't. It's because they aren't top tier villains. They're backup villains. You know, they're kind of intro outro villains, like the Rhino for Spider-Man. The Rhino is a villain that is not going to win. He never wins. He's never going to have a good plan. I mean, none of that stuff is ever going to happen for the Rhino because it's his job to show up and basically lose. And that's why he's never been a huge villain, because he's just sort of he's a spirit carrier villain. He's somebody who's enough of a threat to give your hero a little bit of exercise, and that's basically what he is, a training partner. You know, he's a stable pony for superheroes. Yeah, when you're doing your backup, you can't put as much emphasis on everybody, because then you don't have a lead cool villain. So the lead cool villains get the time. And then the sub-villains, not so much. You know, you can make it progressively less complicated as to what you're going to need. You just don't need a complex tool for every job. Sometimes you just need a big old hammer. Yeah.
So you talked earlier about how you had an outline from the get-go for the overarching plot of the entire series. But my question is, as you continue to write the story, have you ever surprised yourself with things that have happened, like with character interaction or maybe subplots, resolutions?
Oh, sure. Things happen that surprise me all the time.
Can you give me some examples?
Harry meeting his daughter in Skin Game is the most recent example. That didn't turn out anything like I thought it was going to, and it's going to make my job that much harder for the rest of the books. That's okay. I can handle that. And plus, it's going to give me a chance to make things worse for him. So that's always good. There are characters that kind of leap up and take a life of their own from the page that I don't expect to be characters that are going to carry on. Butters is the plainest example of that. But yeah, I mean, stuff happens to surprise me all the time, but if that's not happening, you're probably not doing the writing right. The trick is to learn how to roll with it and to learn which ones to run with and which ones that you have to face palm and say no, that's not going to happen, and turn aside, because at the end of the day, those people still work for me, and they've got a job to do. And if they're not doing their job, then I've got to figure out ways to properly motivate them to do their job. And since I'm not dealing in real life, I can go back in time and change things and have insane godlike power. So, yeah.
When you were being challenged by Debbie Chester, did she give you a writing textbook at all to read? Like her instructor, I believe, was Jack Bickham. And I've read the Scene and Sequel book ad nauseum.
Yes, Bickham and Swain were hampered because they had to write a book that the academic community would respect, which means that they couldn't talk in very plain language.
Right.
So basically, her job was translating the academic-ese of Bickham and Swain into here's what it actually means.
Okay.
She's writing a book. She's writing a book of her own now. I don't know if she's writing it for academia or not, but she wrote and asked me, "Can I pay you to write an introduction? And would you be willing to do that?" And I'm like, "No, you can't pay me to write it. I am willing to do it." I owe her way too much for that, but yeah.
Does the outline ever not work?
You mean like the original?
Yeah, like the overarching plan you mentioned.
No, because it was pretty much a broad plan, and the point is filling in the details. I mean, the overall outline is like, and this book is going to be about necromancers, like that. And I know kind of the general direction of where I'm going to have Dresden end up and all, so I'm able to pace myself because I know what the last story is going to be like. So I'm kind of building up to the last story. That's how you keep power creep from happening. Is you have a destination in mind. So we're growing, but it's not power creep because he's on schedule.
Is there any kind of fantasy being that we wouldn't ever see in the Dresden Files universe? It feels like it's all no holds barred.
Well, the whole idea of the Dresden Files mythology was that I wanted to create an inclusive mythology. That I wanted a holistic mythology that you could explain absolutely everything that was supernatural ever would have a place in the Dresden Files universe that would make sense and that would not conflict with one another. So that's kind of what I've been building. So no, there's nothing that I can imagine that I would just say no, I can't possibly use that. It all fits in there somewhere.
How do gods in the Dresden Files universe, not the almighty that connects the cross and everything, but how do they behave compared with the gods in other fantasy series, like in this world or in your typical D&D world? Is their power dependent on their worship, or is it something entirely different?
It's I can't say very much without ruining the plot of book 19, so book 19 or 20. You have to look at probably the best example. Well, he's not a very good example because Vadarung is one of the really unusual gods in that he has wanted to stay involved in mortal affairs, and the only way you can do that without violating mortal free will is to accept mortal limitations. And so Vadarung has been, Vadarung is basically he's got the pair that drags the ground because he's the one that's like, yeah, I could be immortal and invincible and sort of distant and godly, But instead, I'm going to stay involved and do things, and that means, you know, that's kind of, if you're going to hang around being involved with mortals, one of the things that happens to you is mortality. You know, somebody can come kill you, which would be an awful thing. But battle run is kind of like, bring it on. I've been doing this for a long time, and the other gods are at a slightly, they're involved in many different ways. You know, the Greek, you get to see a little bit more of the Greek gods in action now. But their role has changed as humanity's role on the planet has changed, and they're inextricably linked with humans. But we'll get to see more about how things are going. I mean, I know what Loki's doing and you know, all these other gods that are out and active, but it's not time for them to be on stage yet. So, yeah.
Now that you've had some commercial success, do you find that there's more pressure from either without or even within yourself to produce than it was like before when you didn't have success, you were still trying to make it?
I would say there is considerably more pressure of every description. That's one of the hazards that comes with the success I've enjoyed, is that there is a lot of pressure, and it's something you have to deal with every day. You know, you lose a lot of things as you become more of a public figure. I kind of like the level of fame I have because I'm not really too terribly famous. You know, I mean, I'll get recognized occasionally, just kind of going around doing my daily stuff. All the people at Burger King seem to know me. But I mean, they know me by my order. I'll come get my order and they'll be like, "Hi, Jim," and I'll be, "Hey, how you guys doing?" You know, like that. But mostly I'm only famous at conventions and maybe in bookstores, which is a good level of famous and keeps your head from getting too big. But yeah, I mean, the pressure is tremendous. If only because as I've gotten more successful, more popular, more and more time has to be spent doing other stuff, like going to conventions and doing interviews and doing Skype interviews and people's blogs and podcasts. And you know, for the 2 weeks prior to coming in here, in addition to being in excruciating dental pain or heavily medicated, I was also doing interviews every day. And so there were several hours every day that were dedicated to just, you know, doing interview stuff. And you know, I also had work to do, and you know, I've got my own life issues to do. You know, I've still got to do my laundry, you know, so yeah, I mean, there's tons of it, and that's one of the hazards that comes along with where I've gotten. You know, you can't get to, you really can't get to the top of any career without making sacrifices, and the sacrifice that is demanded of me mostly is time. So, on the other hand, that gives me a really cool problem because I'm in a position where time is more valuable to me than money. And so I get to make a lot of my decisions based on what is going to carve me out, you know, an extra 10 minutes of time to do something fun today. You know, as opposed to, you know, do I have to sweat this other stuff? Again, it's a great problem to have. I mean, it's a super problem to have.
Now that Harry's got better control of the waves, are we going to see him visit any other locations? I know we couldn't fly before, but now we can just whistle up a wave.
Well, he can whistle up a wave. He can't stop, you know, some horrible crawling thing from being there to kill him while he walks it. I mean, just because you know your way around, you've got a map of downtown, doesn't mean you want to. Doesn't mean you want to go through gang territory unnecessarily.
Right.
So, but yeah, I mean, he does have. Harry will continue having more options available to him and more, you know, potential locations he can be doing stuff at. But he's going to be tied very strongly to Chicago because that's his home.
Right. Mother Winter's not looking very good. What happens if she dies?
Not looking good. What are you talking about?
Sick.
She's got the teeth. Well, she's got a racking cough. She's Mother Winter. It doesn't mean she can't grab you and pull you through a puddle into another dimension. She's not supposed to be a hale and hearty person. There would be something badly wrong if she was.
Okay.
Relax.
I go to the gym every day. That's a very important thing for me in maintaining my sanity. Well, not every day, but 6 days. I play a lot of Battlefield 4 lately. I used to be very, very good at it. When Battlefield 2 was out, I was one of the top 50 snipers in the world for about a year and a half, and I enjoyed the hell out of that status. I would get kicked off of people's servers for being a cheater, and I love that. That's a great compliment to get. You must be cheating because you're not missing. But as I've gotten older and my reflexes have slowed down and the kids are getting faster and faster, and so now lately I've been deciding, you know what, I need to just kind of focus on my Battlefield and see if I can still, hang with these children based on the knowledge that I have. And in Battlefield I can. Some of the other games are much more reflex dependent, but Battlefield there's an awful lot of smarts that goes into it. Battlefield's a game that's, are you standing in the right place at the right time is way more important than are you really, really fast on the draw, so. I've been enjoying the hell out of that because I can still hang with the kids as long as I cheat old man style. So that's been a lot of fun for me lately. I play League of Legends because my kid loves the game and all the boys love the game, so I'll get on and play with the boys. Now I'm actually doing League of Legends as a PR exercise. I've got a profile named Jim Butcher Author, and I made it public to everybody on Twitter, and so all my fans who play League of Legends, can send me fan requests, and so I'll log on and just send an invite to all the fans that I've got on my friend list and say, hey, let's go play some League, and then we'll get a bunch of people and we'll go play League of Legends together, and we'll fire up Skype, and I'll be able to talk smack back and forth with my teammates, and we have a good time. So that's really kind of my fun stuff is video game stuff, and I try and LARP when I can. I haven't been able to since last year, but this year's travel schedule has been very, very happy. I'm doing more traveling this year than the previous 2 years combined. So it's made riding a real challenge as well.
You discussed the summer court and the winter court. Will we ever hear any backstory about potential spring or autumn court that failed?
No, there isn't a spring and autumn court as such. The wild is much larger than winter or summer though, so there's all kinds of independent lords that are out there in the wild, among the wild fae. But as such, those courts don't exist except as sort of default things. Somebody like the Earl King would be considered kind of an autumn court figure because he's somewhere between winter and summer. The same for Father Christmas.
Will we be seeing more of the Jade Court of Vampires other than the one mention that they got in Death Mask?
You might see an agent for them later. You probably won't ever actually see them because they're not interested in anything that's happening outside of Chin, and that's all there is to it.
So
which they still call that because China is a new thing.
So would you mind telling us more about what kind of, where they fall on the vampire mythology spectrum?
I'm not going to tell you anything about that. Harry might learn a few things later. But yeah, they're different. They're a much more Eastern version of a vampire. So
I believe you mentioned that dragons will be showing up later in the series.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering, because most of them have just seen Mr. Pharaoh, and is he an indicator of what most dragons are like, or was he more like exceptionally?
There were only 3 left, and Michael killed one of them. So there's 2 more dragons that are still on the face of the earth, and Pharaohbacks and Pyrovacks. So we'll see how that works out.
That's only the European dragons.
Oh sure. Yeah, but the Eastern dragons are much more. They're much more in line with like where the gods are now. But although the European dragons are basically the ones that are basically the sullen, disgruntled workers of the Eastern dragons. Which is why they wound up getting too tangled up in mortal affairs and getting killed, rather than properly seek to their place in the cosmos. But okay, sorry. Babbling now. But anyway, anything else? Yeah.
We didn't see much of Molly in this book, or?
In Skin Game, you'll see a little bit of Molly, but not a ton.
Oh.
You'll kind of get to see sort of an external view of what she's getting to do. But part and parcel of the whole fairy queen gig is you kind of have to be mysterious. You know, it's not something optional for them. They don't do a lot of talking, but she's still Molly, you know, for now.
Are we gonna see fairy kings?
No, because that's a queendom.
Not in Shakespeare.
Shakespeare had no idea what he was talking about. They're a fairy lords. There are kings of various races that are in fairy, like the oh god, I can't remember them now, but they're in the short story I did about the Billy Goat Curse. Yeah, the Tilletway. You know, they have a fairy king. That's more of an Irish Irish Celtic thing. But as far as the courts go, no, they are the queens, and they are the ones who are in charge. There are powerful lords among the fairies, but there are none of them who are kings. Not in the sense of Mab having an equal, because Mab has no equals. You know, except for Titania, and Titania is a bitch.
And Mab is so sweet.
Yeah, well, Mab is simply doing what needs to be done.
Yeah, we're digging that.
But yeah, they don't have equals. There's not an issue of them having a peer. They do have consorts occasionally, and they're powerful figures in Fae, but they're not really kings as
Earl
such.
King wasn't the king.
What's that?
Earl King wasn't the king.
He's the Earl King. He's the king of the goblins, more or less.
Oh.
But he's not a figure. He would not win a fight with Mab, nor would he seek a fight with Mab, nor would he see the point of a fight with Mab, because he doesn't really do what Mab's doing. Mostly he wants to go hunting and find things that are worth killing. But you know, Mab's a high-level administrator. You know, the Earl King's is a field agent.
Okay, what's the, other than like in Dresden Files and some other books you've read, what's your favorite villain that you've created?
The favorite villain I created?
Yeah.
Oh, I like the Wyrd Queen because she was just wacky. She was so pathetically lonely, kind of, that's the way I imagined her, and it kind of gave her this little bit of pathos that that she just didn't understand. You know, that was mainly what made her so dangerous, is she just didn't get it. And she kept seeking a connection that she was never going to have again, and I thought there was something terribly tragic in that. But that's kind of a classic monster story. The monster is a monster because they're so alone. She was a lot of fun. Nicodemus is fun. Marcone is fun. If I had to meet one of my villains, it would be Lara Wraith. I'm not proud. But they're all, villains are so much fun to write, and which is why you can't really have heroes who are too shining and heroic, because then they're not nearly as much fun as a hero who might just start beating somebody up with a baseball bat for information. You gotta have those elements, and those darker elements for your heroes, just as you have elements that are not dark for your villain. Otherwise, a villain who's just pure evil, not nearly so much fun as the villain who's got some redeeming qualities. I mean, even the villain is pure evil but has an awesome sense of humor. That is a much different villain than the villain who's just completely black. Let me go back here.
Oh, I was just wondering, are you planning on leaving Harry as the Winter Knight for the entire rest of the series, or is that something?
I'm not gonna tell you.
But is that going to change him as he goes along, like, or?
How do you know it hasn't changed him already? You don't know.
Read the book.
I know, first changes little, first big changes.
Oh, well, you'll have to see.
No?
Very, very few. I think I've had 3 characters that are based on people I know, I actually knew, and thinking about it, I killed them all. Shiro got an awesome death. He was based on 2 actual martial arts teachers that I knew, and the guys that gave me my only good martial arts story, my only good personal martial arts story, which was an awesome one. I can tell you my only good personal martial arts story if you'd like. All right, when I turned 18, I went down to college, and I'd been studying martial arts at School of Ryukyu Kempo in Independence, Missouri, with a master named Shiro Shintaku. And Shiro Shintaku was an amazing martial artist. He was Japanese, He was a collegiate Aikido champion in Japan, which means he was good at Aikido. He was 6th Dan at Ryukyu Kempo. I saw him at his 6th Dan test. I saw him, they shot 3 arrows at him. And 2 of them had blue feathers and 1 of them had red feathers. And he didn't know what order they were going to be coming at him in until the arrows were going to be in flight. And he had to catch the blue ones and break the red one. And it wasn't they were shooting arrows past him, they were shooting arrows at him. I mean, they were blunt tipped, but they were still being shot at him. And he caught 2 and caught 2 of them and broke 1 of them. And so when they're on Mythbusters wondering about people actually being able to catch arrows, people can actually catch arrows. I've seen it. So, you know, I know it can happen. This guy was amazing. I remember I took an Io-Jitsu class from him. And I still remember the beginning of his Io-Jitsu class where he's like, and this was actually how he spoke, I'm not doing a Miyagi impersonation. I feel that maybe I have done maybe 30 or 35% of my potential as an unarmed martial artist. And as he stands in front of the class, he says, however, I feel I have a firm basic competence in how to use a sword. Like that. And we're like, oh, he kind of sucks hand to hand, but he knows how to, you catch arrows with his bare hands, but he really knows how to use a sword. Okay. And so I took my Jiu-Jitsu class from him. And I knew that he was from an old Japanese family, but I did not know until about 10 years ago that he was from an old Japanese family that could afford a $4 million full Shinto wedding on the roof of a Manhattan skyscraper. You know, that kind of, like helicopter pictures of his wedding family, you know. He was just this funny little guy who moved into kind of a rough neighborhood in my town. And, and lived in the dojo where he taught and was going to college at UMKC. Yeah, I mean, he moved into the neighborhood, and there were a bunch of rough kids that tried to jump him on the way back from the grocery store. Because he was just this little guy, and, you know, maybe 5'8", kind of skinny with a little bit of a pot belly and mussy hair, and he worked hard against, you know. I mean, he looked like an English, like an English graduate student. They jumped him, and so when the police showed up, he said he didn't want to press charges. He said they said, "You want us to arrest him?" He's like, "No, these are children. Don't arrest them. They're a bunch of 17 and 18-year-olds." And he's like, "Don't arrest them. I want you to send them to my school. And if they come to my school, I won't press charges." And the policeman's like, "You want to teach them how to fight?" That's all he's going to do. And so they kind of became the core of his studentry, and really, you know, he kind of changed that whole neighborhood based on how he acted. And you know, and how he taught these guys, and he taught these kids, you know, respect and how to show it, how to give it, as well as how to earn it for themselves. And I love going to classes there. I love learning the martial arts there. And the summer before I went to college, he actually taught a course at noon every day, but nobody ever showed up. So for 3 months, with this extremely advanced martial artist, I was getting one-on-one lessons for an hour and a half every day. And in that circumstance, also, he was one of those teachers that believes that there's no reason not to use pain as a motivator if that's going to help teach you something faster. And I'm one of these students who is the guy who's at the front of the class going, "I'll volunteer for this one. Ow! Okay, I'll volunteer for this one. Ow!" Like that, you know.
You're Ed Gruberman.
Yeah, basically, I'm Ed Gruberman. So I spent 3 months working an hour and a half a day with this guy, and at the end of it, I was a much more dangerous person than I realized. So I'm getting ready to go off to college, and he pulls me on one side after our last lesson. He says, and sits down, and he says, "Oi, Jim, need to talk to you about college." He says, "You go there. There will be other karate students. They will want you to spar with them. You no spar." I said, "Why not?" He says, "Well, your power is it's pretty good," which, you know, if you knew the guy that he was saying on, your power is pretty good, but your control is no good at all. He said, "You martial arts defend life, you be good shape. Martial arts spar, no, not for you." And I said, "Okay, I won't spar." I said, "Oh, good, it's good. You have a good time in school, come visit." And so I went down to school, and you know, with the best of intentions, and I would go to work out there was an area at the gym where the martial artists used, and I would go and I would practice my kata and I practice my strikes and stuff like that, and be like, hey, come spar with us, there's all the taekwondo guys, and I'm like, no, my teacher says I'm not supposed to, and I'm not supposed to do that. I mean, I had a yellow belt, which belts meant about as much to Mr. Shintaku as what whole underwear you wore. He just didn't care. But I got a yellow belt because he felt that I should have a yellow belt, to distinguish me from most of the white belts. That was pretty much, I think, the way it worked. So I'm there and I'm practicing, and I'm doing my stuff, and the other guys are like, come spar with us. No, I don't want to come spar with us. Come spar with us. No, and they start making fun of me, and because I'm 18 years old, eventually they tease me enough that I'm like, okay, we'll try it. So I strap on the gloves and the protector, and I was like, okay, let's spar. I haven't ever really done a whole lot of this before. But we get started, and I'm a good close, tight defense, and I'm not throwing any punches. I'm countering and blocking and waiting for a chance to throw a good punch. And the guy throws a kick that's a little bit too slow, and I block it out with this hand and come in with a good straight midline punch right at the middle. And get it right in the breadbasket. Hit it way, way too hard. The guy doubles over my fist and starts throwing up on the mat. I'm like, oh dude, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. He's like, no, it's fine. It was a clean hit. Like that. And I really didn't mean to, so I didn't spar anymore. I went home a couple weekends later and dropped by the school to visit, and I told my teacher that story, and he just kind of looks at me. He says, you make incorrect punch. I said, what? I said, what? He says, you make incorrect punch. He said, how do you know? You weren't even there, you didn't even see it. He goes, hey, if it made punch correct, it would have killed him. Now, you take off shoes, get on floor, I show you how to make good punch. So that's my one good martial arts. Anyway.
So how much of your training goes into your fight choreography in your books? Because I find that hard.
It's a very different animal. I mean, you want it. I like having the training because I've got some of the background I need to inform it so that I can write it correctly, kind of the way that it might happen in the real world to some degree. But writing a good fight scene is not about knowing martial arts yourself. It's about being able to control the camera so that the reader can see it. It's sort of like a football game. There's all kinds of stuff happening in a football game, when a play starts. But when the announcers are following the play, the announcers follow the ball. And where the ball goes is where it's important. And when you're writing a fight scene, it's the same way. You're following the ball, and in the case of writing a fight scene, you're following the goal of whoever your central character is. And whatever happens around the ball is what matters. And the other things you can just sort of mention that are happening out on the sidelines. But writing a fight scene is really it's like a tennis announcer. You're going back and forth. He throws a punch, he throws a punch, he throws a punch, he throws a punch. Make sure the right reaction of the punch is what happens because of it. But really, it's not about writing a good fight scene. It's not about really knowing martial arts. That helps you make it more authentic. But mostly, it's about your camera angle. And making sure that people can see the punch and what happens when the guy gets punched. But
do you ever have that aha moment when you've been struggling with the writing and it's been very mechanical? Because I know you said that sometimes you just got to sit down and write. Do you ever have that aha moment when you're not at the keyboard and you can't wait to get back and start writing the idea that just has fully formed in your head like that?
I can't wait to get back to the keyboard. But yeah, I mean, I'll have the moment where I go, that's how I torture him. That's how I torture him best.
I usually have that moment in the shower, so that...
Yeah, and a lot of people do. You get it. I usually get it while I'm driving. Occasionally I'll get it while I'm actually trying to talk through the issue with somebody. Priscilla's seen that happen a few times where I've been trying to talk to her. Well, I'm having a problem with the chapter because of this and this and that and that. And then she'll just get like on Google chat, she'll just get like ... and then I'll be like, ah! She'll be like, right, go work, I'm not gonna get it out, useful out of it.
Do you ever keep any notebooks or anything to write stuff down with, or you just keep it all in your head?
Mostly I'm of the opinion that if it's not a good enough idea to stay in my head, it's probably not a strong enough idea to work with. That said, I do have a lot of stuff written down in like a dozen different notebooks that are scattered around. I'm always finding, or on a random piece of paper or on napkins, if there's something that the process of writing it down is often what I need to cement it in my head. And I don't necessarily need to go back to refer to it so much as I get it written down on paper, there's the idea, okay, now it'll stay in there.
You mentioned Google Chat. Are there any other things you can use for like productivity, to keep yourself on track, maybe other than napkins and so forth?
Not lately so much. Productivity, that's been a little dicey this spring. But mostly I've got a word count that I want to reach by the end of the week, which amounts to about 1,000 words a day. If I can do about 7,000 words a week, I'm doing pretty well. When I'm writing, sometimes it's got to be more than that. It changes based on how close the deadline is. But I'll sit and go, okay, I've got, the deadline is here, and I've got this many thousand words to write, so I'm going to divide that by the number of days, and that's how many words I need to average per day. And let me take a few days, let me subtract a few days out so that I can take a day off now and then and work it out that way. But yeah, kind of having a weekly thing, you can't be too hard on yourself of I've got to get exactly this many words every day. So if you have a day where it's like, this is not going well at all, like I got 750 words today, but at the same time, you just got to, it's something you've got to be able to forgive yourself and go, okay, well, you know what, but tomorrow maybe I'll get 2,200. And that's how that's pretty much how I have to move forward.
You work 7 days, you write 7 days?
How close to the deadline are we? When I get really close to the deadline, yeah. When I'm not as worried about the deadline, I'll be pleased if I can hit my 7,000 words, like if I have 3 good nights in a row and I do 2,200 words a night, then I can take a few days off if I want to, because I've beat my week's quota. If I'm getting close to the deadline though, and my words per day count has somehow slipped higher than that, then no, I don't get the time off. What?
So this is vacation for you?
In as much as writing productivity goes, yes it is. But so is touring, and so are most days when I've got to dedicate to interviews and so on. I do know that for some reason the speaking part of my brain disconnects me from the writing part of my brain. So just if I'm having too much conversation in a day, I have trouble getting anything written. And I've got to go someplace quiet for a while where I just don't have to talk to people or listen to people. It's that conversational audio part of my head that doesn't get along with the writing part of my head. I need quiet to write it. I don't know if that's true for everybody, but it is for me.
I think the other day you mentioned you put on some music or something. Is that?
I'll put on music, or I'll put on a movie that I've seen so many times it might as well be music, because I don't need to look up at it. So Star Wars, films get used a lot. Big Trouble in Little China, Army of Darkness. The wrestling comedy Ready to Rumble is a really good one for writing. But I just love Oliver Platt as the champion wrestler of the WWW. I mean, that's just awesome.
Do you listen to calming music, or do you listen to stuff that has like a beat where you can get tight and go really fast?
Yes. I've got a big mix of different kinds of music. Mostly it's pretty active. The last Dresden book got written to mainly Lindsay Sterling music. Both her, a bunch of her covers and her original stuff too. So.
Not directly Dresden Files, but is there any vague estimate for when Cinder Spider will be released?
I've got to finish writing it first. It was due November 1st of 2013. Yeah, exactly. And that deadline keeps getting bumped forward. So last year was kind of a bad year for getting stuff done for me. But I've gotten about 80% finished, and I'm going to write the last 20% as soon as I'm done with the tour, and hopefully get it done before July 1st, so I'll have the second 6 months of the year to write the next Dresden book.
I think a lot of people are looking forward to the cat.
Oh, I know, right? And I'm supposed to talk about Cinder Spires for 2 hours tomorrow. I don't know how that's going to work. Nobody's here to read it. How can you ask me any questions? I guess I can read some. Okay, I'll see if I can't bring a few chapters later. But anyway. Where are we on time?
What?
15 minutes.
It's 11:51.
15.
Okay, so, yeah. We've got a few more minutes then.
Are your outsiders basically Lovecraftian elder gods?
Well, not all of them. They've got minions and so on too.
Right.
But yeah, we're going to get more Lovecraftian as we go. Yeah.
So one thing that I really appreciate about the Dresden Files series is I've read a lot of urban fantasy, and I've watched urban fantasy like Supernatural, and the problem with a lot of it is when they bring in, when they try to do the, let's just say everything's true, certain mythos just get tossed out. And for me, the big one that's always tossed out is like Christian mythos. But the Dresden Files has characters who are Christian, who are straight up okay with the, like, their religion works really well with the world, and the mythos of Christianity is also in that world that works very well. And I was just wondering, like, if you had any, like, what were your inspirations for tying those in, and also, like, what sources do you use to get Christian mythos into the stories?
I'm trying to remember exactly what the original definition of Catholic means.
Universal.
Yeah, universal, exactly. Originally, Catholicism was an inclusive religion, as it was originally incepted. When Catholicism was spreading out across Europe and other places, they would say, don't go tell somebody that their tree isn't holy. Go bless their tree and accept that it is holy, and include it and explain to them why. It just means that they're actually on your side already. It's been a long time since really Catholicism kind of had that attitude. But originally, that was how Catholicism spread out. It was the idea that that everybody had already seen the same God, and they just didn't understand that they were looking at the same thing that you were talking about. And that was sort of kind of my inspiration for how to do things in the Dresden Files. And the Dresden Files, all these other mythos have existed, and they were there for a reason and doing what they were doing for a reason. Things have changed over time. They're not active the same way they were active 3,000 years ago. All of them. But they're still there, and they still have a role to play. It's just different than it used to be. You'll see a little bit more of that because we get to see Hades in action a little bit in this book. So. Parker is probably my favorite author, hands down. The author of the Spencer novels. He died far too young because I wasn't done reading all the stuff he was writing. And it's just tragic that they're still writing Robert B. Parker's series as Robert B. Parker's, this book written by so-and-so, which is too bad because they can't write like he does, but I don't think anybody can. Let's see. Sanderson writes an awfully good novel as far as guys who are working right now. I still go back and reread Blood and Cook all the time. I like Naomi Novik's books; they're a lot of fun. Rothfuss, of course. Rothfuss has just got the most quirky skills of any writer I've ever seen. Probably the most skilled writer alive and working today is Lois McMaster Bujold, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
Professionally speaking, I wish to have her babies. Let's see, one of the new guys that I really like is Benedict Jacka. I think he's really shaping up well.
How do you spell that last name?
Jacka. Benedict Jacka.
Loves life.
His stuff is, he writes good stuff. He's got a really sharp mind and does some really nifty stuff with his fiction. But there are always new people who are coming out, and you can never read everybody, and there's not enough time to read all the good books that exist in the world.
So, how about some of the, like Bradbury, some of the old stuff like that?
Let's see.
Think of some of those Asimov or.
I haven't really enjoyed it, but with the hard science fiction guys, I didn't enjoy nearly as much. Bradbury, there's some of his books that I really like. Something Wicked This Way Comes is a good book. Let me think here. I read some Heinlein. I'm not nearly as impressed with Heinlein as I'm apparently supposed to be. But some of his books were cool. I like some of the things he wrote. Puppet Masters was nifty. I like Starship Troopers.
Lost Things in Amber.
What's that? Oh yeah, the Amber books, of course, by Zelazny. I had all kinds of fun with them. Although they were just hard-boiled private eye books that happened to have this giant fantasy cosmos setting. But he should have been writing private eye books the way his voice worked so well. Let me think who else.
Edits.
Yeah, David Eddings. Tolkien, of course, I go back and read Tolkien all the time. David Eddings only wrote one series, that first 5 books of Bavaria. In my world, sort of like there was only one Matrix movie and only 3 Star Wars movies, you know, that's kind of, in my head, that's the way it works, and I'm just much happier over here in my universe. Yeah. But I mean, great storytelling is great storytelling, whether it's books or whether it's movies or wherever you find it. You know, there are video games that have some fantastic storytelling these days.
Frank Funk.
What's that?
Have you read the Osmonds?
I have not.
Oh.
Although I would still recommend the Prydain Chronicles to anybody who wants to write fantasy.
Oh, yes.
Because they're still excellent. I go back and read them, and they're still excellent books. There's not a lot of books that you can read when you're 7 and then go read again when you're 42 and still find them excellent. The Prydain Chronicles by Lloyd Alexander.
Oh, is that the one that was part of the,
Yeah, it starts out with the Book of 3 is the first one. But they're really short. They're like 60,000 words each or something like that. So you can just devour the entire thing as one novel, and it's still a good story. Let me think of any others. Fafard the Grey Mouser by Fritz Leiber. The Fafard books are wonderful. I still go back and read Robert Howard once in a while. I'll still go back and read the Jungle Books by Kipling. They're still good books. But yeah, so there you go. There's a sample of authors I read. But, okay, well, I think it's about time. There's other people sort of looking at the room like maybe they deserve to have it, so they probably do. Thank you, guys.